Service Corps Radio. My name is Brad Pinsky, and I'm one of your hosts. Today we have with me Chip Comstock, Kurt Rohn, and John Murphy, and we are all live at FDIC 2011, sitting here amongst the exhibit halls and the speakers, and we're going to do a live show for you today. We are the four, I will call us FDIC attorneys. We're speaking throughout this show on many different topics, and today what we want to talk about is all the hot topics we've had over the last 27 shows I think we've done now, hot topics we see coming, so I think we should just throw them out, talk about whatever we want to talk about. We're going to go for about 30 minutes here. Don't be afraid, don't be scared just because we're four attorneys. I think we're going to try not to bore you to death here, and hopefully we'll have a good time, like we always do. So, I'm just going to start. One of my favorite topics, frankly, was physical fitness. How fat is too fat? What are the departments doing? So, anyone want to jump in with, let's say, the highlights of the physical fitness topic?
I don't think they're doing anything. That's the problem. I mean, we have people here, and I hate to say it, and I love the fact that we get all these people at FDIC, everybody's learning, but it really concerns me when I see somebody pushing a walker down the exhibit booth or on oxygen. And you say, okay, look, I know they're retired or whatever, but we certainly have people who are out of shape, overweight, who we're exposing to the risks of firefighting. And the question is, does the department have some responsibility, legal, moral, or otherwise, for people who aren't in shape?
Well, I think that what we're going to be seeing under the NFPA standard, 1582 and 1583, and taking a look at the statistics last year, where 53% of our firefighters died from cardiac arrest, and other heart conditions, strokes, diabetes, hypertension. We're going to be seeing organizations trying to implement those either fitness standards while people are in the organization, which is a big challenge to an organization because they have to create a standard, they have to apply the standard, they need to find practitioners that can do the physical ability, physical exams on people, and then people are going to fall out. They either have hypertension, they got high cholesterol, they got bad heart disease. And if the programs are set up where these firefighters, which we spend a lot of money on bringing into the organization and training them to do some sort of treatment, like if somebody has bad heart disease, then you do the four-way bypass, or you lower the cholesterol, lower the blood pressure, take care of the diabetes. The careers continue. It's going to be that one individual who may be the 400-pound firefighter. Is that individual able to do the job? So then you have to take a look at it from a legal perspective. Are there legal standards that we're going to be seeing over the next year or two when firefighters are now, we know that there's a known hazard and the firefighter is the hazard. Is there an obligation on the firefighter or the department to mandate medical physicals?
Well, I think recognizing that there's a problem is the easy part. The hard part is figuring out where to draw the line. And, we can look at it from a medical standard. We can look at it from, organizational standard in terms of weight and height and various types of performance standards in that regard. But I think fundamentally the simplest way, the easiest way to draw the line is through a physical fitness, an annual physical fitness evaluation, some sort of a hands-on obstacle course physical abilities test, and not look so much at the person's total body weight, not look at their body composition. If you can complete the obstacle course, if you can complete the physical abilities test, then you can continue with the organization. If not, we've got to put you into some sort of remedial program and get you the help that you need, if it's dietary, if it's physical fitness, or whatever. But I think we're better off looking at it from that perspective than trying to say he's too heavy, she's okay, and because you just get into way too many side issues that in turn are going to lead to legal issues.
Chip, anything? Or
I think I just think we can't ignore it, and I think there's a whole lot of reasons why we can't ignore it, and we're here to protect firefighters. I mean, we always talk about trying to bring ourselves up to the most recent standards, trying to keep firefighters alive. Everybody goes home, and that's one of the basis, the most simple things that we can do is make sure we're taking care of the firefighters by having exams and have them face reality.
And so my last comment on this is, you know, I'm not always a pusher of an NFPA standard as a lawyer, but there are some that are must-look-ats. And to me, NFPA 1582 gives great guidance in this, just gives great guidance. And so how can we ignore 1582? You've got to send somebody to a good physical that gets a 1582 physical. That's my 2 cents. And I guess I'll end on this topic with this, is it's cheaper to provide the physicals than it is to pay for the deaths. It's got to be. All right, Chip, what was your one of your favorite topics, or your hot and upcoming topics of the next year?
I think one that we've seen on many occasions is one that's I'm going to actually punt to Kurt, and that has to deal with Facebook, social media, which is what he's speaking on, and we're seeing that come up all the time. So I think those are some of the issues that need to be addressed, and departments have to have policies on. So, Kurt, any comments?
Well, I think you'd have to be living in a cave not to realize the problems that social media and digital imagery are posing to the fire service. It just barely a couple of days go by without someone getting themselves in trouble, getting their organizations in trouble over something that's either posted on Facebook, a video or a photo that gets out from an incident scene, or even situations where one firefighter sets up a video camera and secretly records another firefighter in a bathroom or in some other private area. These cases, we talk about medical requirements and physical requirements ending people's career. These cases are ending the careers of dozens and dozens of firefighters, and there's very little guidance out there. That's the thing that concerns me. There's very little guidance out there in terms of what a fire department should do in order to educate their firefighters and establish standards for how the fire department expects people to deal with the issues that are out there. And it's a changing world. It's a moving target. We've got the National Labor Relations Board recently jumped in on one arena of one aspect of this case, and this First Amendment. Chip's going to be talking about First Amendment issues. There's privacy issues both on the employee's part, but also on, whether you want to call it the victim's part or the other co-workers of the person who's possibly taking videos, and it's just a big mess, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on tomorrow.
So let me just kind of dig in here a little bit, because I think that it's important, because I've gotten a lot of questions in the class I did this morning on training liabilities and social media, which didn't seem to have much of a connection until we start videotaping training exercises, videotaping a lot of the stuff that people do, and then they post it out on the web or the net or Facebook or whatever. So the question is, what are departments to do? Departments, are they better off not to have a policy and just, let
the old ostrich routine?
Yeah, stick your head in the sand? Or do you create a policy which puts you in jeopardy, with the NLRB AMR a ruling that just occurred a month or so ago. And so, what we try to do as lawyers is try to guide our clients into the right direction. And sometimes you can have overbearing policy that basically, I think there's a case in Pennsylvania where the department said, we don't want any social media exposure, no pictures, nothing. And so does the pendulum swing so far to the left that we really can't engage in a social media environment where there's positive benefits in social media as long as it's controlled? And so do you have like 4 or 5, do no harm policies, or paragraphs in a policy, or you just have no policy, and then when somebody violates a no policy situation, then how do you deal with that?
It's easy if you don't have a policy after the fact. It's easy to tell someone, hey, you committed conduct unbecoming. It's a lot harder up front to do the hard work up front to identify, where do we want you to go in terms of getting training information and being able to share information, and where do we say you've gone too far. But we've got to work at doing that up front.
One of the technology issues and training issues we talked about earlier on was helmet cams and dash cams. And I thought the helmet cams topic is a great topic because it's everything you're talking about. And the helmet cams we now create, are we creating liability? We're creating one I watched, I think it was from New Jersey, was of a scene that was completely out of control, and you could see there was no incident command, which ties back to something we've talked about before, where you have no command structure in place, which is a NIMS requirement to have an incident command structure, the most basic of NIMS requirements, and you could tell there's no incident command because nobody has control of the scene, and now you're recording your own liability. And while on the one hand for training it's okay, on the other hand, are we hanging ourselves?
Well, I was going to say, I don't think we're creating liability. We're just, as you said, we're documenting liability. We're making some plaintiff's lawyer really easy, his life easy, showing, look at what these guys didn't do. Maybe that's not a bad thing. I say
Spoken
that
as a true lawyer.
Spoken as a lawyer, because we had a big discussion a couple days ago here in a classroom with the idea of it. Sometimes, unfortunately, we have departments out there who ignore the magazines and the books and the articles and go about doing things the way they've done it for 80 or 100 years. And sometimes the only thing that changes, that causes them to change, are lawsuits. And I'm not saying that lawsuits are something that I'm in favor of, but I'm realist.
But not saying you're against them
I'm
either.
not against them either, but seriously, I guess I look at it sometimes that we have departments that are so far out there, the only way we correct behavior is from litigation. So if somebody's been doing something and they're that bad at it and it's captured on film, maybe the lawyer won't change it, but maybe somebody else who sees it will. And that's a way to bring it to people's attention. So it documents the actual facts.
Another thing I'd like to say in favor of videos is I use the Rodney King video in some of the classes that I teach, and I don't think any of the police officers involved in that, virtually it's guaranteed none of the police officers involved in that beating realized they were being videotaped. And if they had realized they were on videotape, maybe it wouldn't have gone down the way it did. But the fact is it was. But, why would people's behavior change when they're being videotaped? But the reality is, it does. And so maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe people will behave a little bit better if they know they're being videotaped. So I don't see being videotaped as necessarily a bad thing.
Well, and using that example, from Rodney King, that exposes maybe a particular culture, and now people say we have to deal with this, and we're going to have to put remedial measures into place to deal with that. So again, it's how we improve ourselves, either internally by viewing what we've filmed, or externally by having other people bring that to our attention. But it is what it is, I guess.
Well, let me just throw a thing in. This is a word that Kurt likes to use, is spoliation.
Spoliation.
We can hardly pronounce it.
My favorite word.
Much less spell it. So
we'll have no spoliating in here.
I don't think we're going there. Yeah, that could be illegal. I'm not sure. But anyway, you talk about data recording, and then how do you archive that sort of stuff? And so, is there a shelf life? Is it a year? Is it a month? Is it, after the call, you just delete all of the, the video off your webcam and all that sort of stuff? So part of that policy issue, again, we go back to policy. If you're going to have webcam or helmet cams or any other sort of recording device, I think an organization, it's their responsibility to make sure that that stuff is preserved for a finite period of time.
Right, and I think this whole area, we're really talking, we talk about it in terms of being one issue, but it's really a couple of different issues. And in particular, a department should have a digital imagery and photography policy and a separate social media policy. They're really separate issues. They intertwine, they have to overlay, the two policies have got to work together. But I think it helps me anyway, helps keep my brain straight to look at them as two separate issues.
And the third issue then is also a records retention policy, because you should have a standard on all type of paper or electronic media as to how long you save them.
Right.
And in New York State, at least, and federally also, in freedom of information law, this stuff is all going to be available for the public display unless it shows something horrible or that maybe shouldn't be released. But this is all going to be available for the public. As a result, federally in both my state and New York, you do have to archive it. You have to have a record in case somebody requests that type of document. So, these things that we think are going to stay private, and truthfully they should. It's a shame, because we should be able to record all of our training videos and our hectic emergent scenes, which the public doesn't understand why they're hectic, because they've never been in there. We should be able to use that for our training, but unfortunately it is going to come back either to help us or hurt us, but we shouldn't necessarily not do it out of that fear. What's one of your favorite upcoming topics? I think are we on you now?
Oh, I think we're talking about probably, I think one of the most critical topics is the social media. The next most critical topic, I think I'll pass to John.
Well, I think, what I talked about in my training session this morning was the awareness on 1403 live fire training. And there's several organizations that are out there that are trying to qualify live burn training, like instructors or monitors or mediators or whatever, to make sure that we do live training safely. And I think a lot of that, you take a look at a couple of cases around the country where firefighters died because the training officer or the staff or chief was unaware of what the requirements are. The litigation ensued, which created change. And then, we keep going back to litigation creates this sort of change. And, in Florida, we've seen it. We've seen it in New York. We're going to be seeing more of it, where I think that when you take a look at how we conduct our training sessions, we need to ensure that there's, safety is paramount. And what we have seen, again, is, back in the day, we used to just acquire a house and just go in and burn the hell out of it. And then, by the grace of God, nobody got hurt or contaminated or that we know about. They probably are all dead by now. But there's rules. And I think that, there's other agencies like the EPA gets involved and, NFPA gets involved, and these regulatory agencies take a look at, what are we doing? It's not very safe. Let's make it safer. And so I think this training for 1403 is going to be a good standard. May be hard to achieve in some areas. And in the class I did this morning, some organization says we don't do any acquired structure fires anymore. They all have to be fixed buildings with known, burn patterns. They have thermocouplers. They have, special material inside and ventilation and, exits and stuff in case things go bad. But that's an expensive proposition. A lot of our firefighters across the country are volunteer, and they don't have a lot of the resource. And so they do the best they can. But I think if they're going to use acquired structures or other buildings, then I think they need to have their training people trained, to the proper standard and enforce the codes as we see them. Because lawyers are going to come in, there's a training death again, and we're going to make an example out of that poor department, which kind of ramps it up for a while. We have a tendency to forget stuff. I think our industry, everything kind of rises up when it hits the fan, and then it all drops off because nothing's happened for 6 months or a year, and then it's a shame that we have to do that.
I was going to say, isn't that true, unfortunately, with so many fire service deaths that we see, the same issues coming, repeating themselves.
Lessons relearned.
Yeah, or not, relearned or not learned.
Lairdville wasn't new. Lairdville happened decades beforehand. Sure. It's amazing we didn't learn from that beforehand, or that didn't stay intact.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one of my issues that I would like to see as next year's issues, because frankly, I understand economic times, and generally in all municipalities are immune for their decisions not to spend money on certain items. But the municipal cutbacks, where the fire service is under attack, primarily because of our pensions and other things, we're going to, we're violating, if you can use that word, 1710 of the NFPA with minimum staffing. We're requiring 2 people or 3 people out on an engine or a vehicle, which to me is ridiculous. We're cutting back equipment. I sat in on what Chief Lasky said, and I loved what he said. He said, our system is the lowest bid process. You're getting the cheapest equipment that money can buy. And at some point, our municipalities, and this is where I hope the lawyers do take the municipalities to task, at some point, we, the legal community, somehow are going to have to succeed to stop allowing or to cause the municipalities to stop spending the least amount on dangerous situations. And we have to. And I don't know how we're going to do that, but I hope with minimum staffing and horrible gear and cheap equipment, we're going to stop that.
Well, it's, one thing is, I think that the courts, unfortunately, though, are going to be reluctant to get into and second guess legislative decisions as to what resources they want to allocate in the communities. And so, while I agree with you, I think realistically the courts, for other reasons, are going to stay out of the issue. I think from a fire department standpoint, one of the things we have to do is, if we're going to be learned about our profession and what the limitations may be from a lack of staffing or inadequate equipment, it's up to the fire service leaders to go to the politicians and say, we can't do interior firefighting. If you're not going to give us sufficient manpower or sufficient equipment, then we're going to stand outside and lob water on the fire, and that's what and that's what you're willing to pay for. And make the decisions and have fire commanders stand up and make it very clear, this is what you get. And if something happens after that, then it's the politician's responsibility, because again, the fire chief, the head of that department, owes, I think, a responsibility to his firefighters to not put them in a position of peril because of a lack of funding.
I agree, and you know, I don't think the courts really want to get involved in it. Sometimes they are getting dragged into the battle, but I don't think they're really in a good position to be able to evaluate all of the issues. And I wish that more chiefs would step forward and have that frank conversation with the politicians. I wish politicians would have that frank conversation with the taxpayers, but it doesn't happen, and the politicians say, well, we can close this station and it's really not going to impact firefighters, and we're going to go from 4 to 3 or 3 to 2 or 2 to 1, and it's really not going to. We're just going to make sure that we do it safely. But it's not happening. You know, and the analogy I use, it's like you have a 747. You're going to fly it from Boston to Paris, okay? And so the 747's flying, and all of a sudden an engine goes out. And then another engine goes out. So now you're flying with 2 engines. But the jet still makes it to Paris safely because, you know, it had some reserve capacity. And now the airline calls the pilot and says, okay, now fly it back. And see, it's not safe to fly the plane back. Don't you understand? 2 engines are gone.
Well, you made it the whole way with
But you
2.
made it the whole way. How can you say it's unsafe?
Right.
You know, and it's just I just.
But Department of Labor, though, you know, it's universally true, I believe. Department of Labor standards require the employer to provide us a safe workplace. So should we, couldn't we, can't we, will we find a way to say there, at some point, certain things are universally accepted as not a safe workplace? And maybe we should push that. You know, my village, in which I'm a captain, doesn't provide us physicals. Do we not know that that's not an issue? You know, my village at the moment has been found to have mold all over the walls of one of our stations. Is that not an issue? I mean, don't we know these things? Why is the Department of Labor not getting involved in some of these issues? Maybe that's an avenue the firefighters can approach.
You know, I think one of the responsibilities of us as attorneys and, you know, firefighters is to try to find a solution. And I think we can't help your mold problem. We take a D10
I wish
bulldozer.
you could. Just come visit.
A D10 bulldozer will take care of that, and a big hefty bag. But I think that, you know, we take a look at, you know, how do you make sure that the environment is safe? And I know we've had a lot of conversation about regionalization and consolidation, which is highly controversial in a lot of areas. And in Washington State, it's, you know, pretty much the norm. You know, if you're finding yourself in a kind of a jam financially, you look for a partner fire department. And, you know, but when you take a look at the controversy from the rest of the country, some of the areas are so rural, you know, you may have a 5,000 square mile fire district, and then if you join with your neighbor, now you got a 10,000 square mile fire district. You know, what purpose is that? But I think as we get more into the urban and suburban areas, and you're taking a look at, you know, budget restrictions, I think we need to take a look at a larger scope as, you know, joining forces with other organizations to try to, you know, hold down costs and make sure that the environment is safe for the fire department. And as attorneys, I think it's incumbent on us, when everybody's all fighting about money, is that we need to take a look at, maybe taking it a step above, and look at these sort of, you know, new organizations, new legal entities, you know, which are formulated as part of this consolidation and regionalization programs.
We are just about out of time, but what I'd like to do is go around for final closing thoughts, comments about where we're going to go, where we've been, where you'd like to see us go. Starting with Chip.
In a class that Kurt and I did, one of the recurring themes, and we talked a little bit today about, is do you need to have policies and procedures, or are you better off not having a policy and procedure so that if you do something wrong, they can't use that policy and procedure against you? It's the head in the ostrich with the head in the stand. And there are so many issues out there that should have policies and procedures to avoid issues and make sure people are training to those policies and procedures. You can avoid a lot of legal issues. And we know, as Kurt and I talked, and we've talked before, you can't have policies and procedures for everything. There are some critical things that need to be addressed. We talked, for one, is driving driving liability. And so I think departments have to be proactive and have to, if you don't have anything, start with one and say, we're going to have one policy, we're going to work on that, we'll get that done, and we'll move on to the next one. And whether it's social media or whether it's accountability, try to determine what those risky issues are for your department and start working on it.
One of the issues that I've been working on the last couple of years has been firefighter discipline. There's a lot of misinformation out there about certain rights that firefighters have, the Garrity right, Weingarten rights, and various things. And I think that, given the amount of discipline that I'm seeing across the country on various levels, I think that one of the areas that I want to focus on and that we possibly in a future podcast can focus on is going to be firefighter discipline.
John?
My class today was on training liabilities, and I find that there's a lot of training officers out there that are volunteered. They're not volunteering or assigned. They just get it into a department or a position that they're really not prepared to do. And so I think it's incumbent on an organization to make sure that the people they put into a training position are trained to be a trainer, because we're seeing these sort of my way or the highway boot camp sort of mentality, especially in recruit academies, and then not complying with the standards that are already available to them. It takes a little bit of time and a little bit of research on their part to make sure that when they do conduct a training session, it's safe. Because we injured last year over 8,000 firefighters in training events. And then last year there were 7 firefighters killed in training events, and a majority of that has to do with cardiac health. They died from cardiac arrest, and that's one of the simplest things that we can identify and fix. And so I'm encouraging fire training officers to put into their mix